Ben Okri, el novelista nigeriano radicado en Londres, es el más joven miembro del trío de haces de la literatura de Nigeria, Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, Premio Nobel de Literatura, y el propio Ben Okri, quien en 1991 recibió la más alta distinción literaria que da Inglaterra, el Premio Booker. Ben, one of the most beautiful books of contemporary literature is The Famished Road, where children know they are only spirits passing through the world. Where did you get such an extraordinary idea?
Oh, well, first of all, I want to thank you for, what you said. I'm very touched by that. The story of the genesis of a novel is usually very long. It's very complicated. I think it was Thomas Mann who spent 16 years writing his Joseph novel, and then wrote a book about that, which is about 400 pages long, just trying to investigate the roots of the idea. The roots of the famished road are very deep, and some of it goes back to my childhood. But the most important part of it, I would divide it into three. The first most important part is a living legend of Abiku children in Nigeria. In many parts of West Africa, there are these children who are acknowledged to be spirit children. In fact, the Yorubas call them Abikus, the Igbos call them Ogbanjes, and various other peoples have got different names for them. And these are children who they're born, and as soon as they're born, they die because they don't want to hang around. They don't very much like human reality, because they've seen what a mess human beings and adults, especially adults, they've seen what a mess adults have made of society, of relationships, of history. They've been around before and they've seen wars, lovelessness, unhappiness, unkindness, sort of wasted opportunities, failed political dreams, and they just really don't want to have any part of it. So they're born, and then they go back, and then they're born again, and then they go back. And there's this cycle. After a period of time in the tradition, because these children tend to come back to the same mothers, they tend to come back to the same family. It's almost like a destiny that has to be unraveled, it has to be lived, yeah? But you can imagine in a culture, after a period of time, people begin to understand this phenomena. They begin to say, a child is born, they look at the child and say, that child looks familiar. Yeah, and they devise methods by which they can recognize this child if the child comes back again. So it's quite deep in the tradition. But the strange thing is that it's so pervasive in Nigeria and most of West Africa. It is so pervasive that we take it for granted. Almost every family has got somebody who's an Abiku child, you see. So we take it for granted. It's like if you live in a mountainous region, you stop seeing the mountains. If you live in the desert, you no longer see the desert. It was Borges who said that the best proof that the Quran was written by Arabs is that a camel is not mentioned there once. It's like that you stop seeing it. So there's that dormant tradition, and it's not just dormant, it's also very powerful, because we've had poets like John Pepper Clark, Wole Soyinka, even Christopher Okigbo. They've written poems about their Abiku child. Christopher Okigbo himself is an Abiku child. Wole Soyinka, in his autobiography, Ake, acknowledges that he was a spirit, is an Abiku child. The concept of the spirit child is one I brought to it. You see, it's known as Abiku, but I had to find a poetic transliteration for that word. But also in doing that, the concept of the actual notion of the Abiku got transformed from what it was into something else. Because the Abiku child in West African mythology, in West African life, let's forget mythology, is actually it's quite a frightening, quite a terrifying phenomena. As you can imagine, if you're a mother and you've given birth to this same child about 4 or 5 times, it's a nightmare. The child turns up and you say, oh my God, it's this child again, you know.
And that child is going to die.
The child usually just quits. You see, it's quite complicated because there are usually a number of reasons why the child chooses to die and a number of factors that makes the child usually want to stay. Often these children have got their companions in the other world, yeah? And they usually make pacts with these companions, right? That as soon as they're born, they're going to go back to their friends, their colleagues, their mates, over there in the other world, you see? So there's a promise that they have to fulfill. And anyway, even if they wanted to stay, their companions wouldn't let them. Yeah, they're taunted and drawn and seduced away from reality. So there's that. And then the second thing is that there are also strong things that families can do to actually break the bonds that these children have with the spirit world. There's some things that can be done, and sometimes, occasionally, the children themselves choose to want to stay. The things that can be done to break the bonds are very complicated, very, very complicated things. I'm going to give you this background to some of the story. Because it's completely irrelevant. All of this is irrelevant in the sense that when I was actually writing a novel, it was never intended to be about the Abiku child as such, because I'm not interested in the slightest in the anthropological material of this phenomena. One doesn't want to write a novel that people will read and they'll say, oh dear, how very cute. Oh, they have these practices in West Africa. You mean they have children like this? Oh, how very strange. Tell me more. That's not very interesting, because after people have heard that once or twice, they fall asleep and they're bored, and then they read about other practices in other parts of the world. That's not interesting. What was interesting for me was the way in which the very existence of that fact in African life already hints at and suggests something in the mental and spiritual frame of the people that already abolishes the boundary between living and dying, between life and death. It means instantly that the people have a perception of time which is almost like a river. So life, death, the unborn, the born, the ancestors. You see, the kind of realms of existences, all of them are, as it were, co-simultaneous. They all exist on the same plane. There's no realm up there where they go. And so when your parents die, they don't go somewhere, they're here. And I keep saying this about the African worldview, that the ancestors are universal, in the sense that, African families leave Africa and they go to Canada or Greenland, and they can still, as it were, invoke their ancestors, even away from home. In other words, there's a universal realm, an elastic realm, where the dead as well as the unborn dwell side by side with us.
So the relationship is always there.
Yes, it's always there.
With the ancestors, doesn't matter wherever they move to.
No, it doesn't matter. Whether they go to the moon, whether they go to Wales.
The bonds.
No, not just the bonds, the presence.
The presence.
The presence. You see, African reality, it's taken me a long time to actually realize what I've always felt instinctively. And it's deep in the roots of my people, which is that we've always perceived reality to be much vaster than the Western model. The divisions between life and death, for example, the minute you take down that wall or dissolve that wall, your whole thinking about everything is different. The way you live is different, your serenity is different, your attitude to death is different, your attitude to life is different, many, many, many things are different. And And the minute, and so the famished road necessarily is therefore becomes a novel in which realms, all these different realms between the dead, the unborn, ancestors, the future, the past, the present, the invisible, the visible, all of that coexisting in this plane. It had to be a novel that could just wander between all of these realms effortlessly. Not because of a program or a philosophy or anything I'm bringing to it from any reading, but because that is the instinctive and the natural worldview that is in my blood. But you see, when you then take that from a point of view of semi-exile, in other words, you've been away from home for a long time, a great part of you has been kind of, as it were, steeped in this very narrow Western tradition of the division of reality and the division of things, and the belief that the things that you see, wall, table, chair, camera, flower, only the things that you see are real. When you've become slightly steeped in that tradition, and then you begin to, as it were, you begin to find your frame, you begin to find something in you resistant to this, uncomfortable with it, unable to breathe, like wearing a shirt with a tie that's too sort of tight around your neck, so you almost start to asphyxiate. One of two things happens. Either the mind goes out, you completely surrender to this worldview, and your spirit gets narrowed and shrunken, locked in a cage, or you make a journey of liberation back to your origins. And that's what happened with me. And when I made that journey back, a new life and a new way of looking at life and a new way of writing just busted at my fingertip.
How old were you when you arrived in England?
I first came to England when I was about a year and a half. My dad brought me here. He came to study law. When I was dragged along, they never asked my opinion whether I wanted to come here or not. But I got brought along. I was here for 5-6 years. And then Dad had finished his degree, and like a true patriarch, true old African, he wanted to go back. And for him, life was Africa. And he went back, and he insisted that we followed. The unfortunate, or rather fortunate thing, the sad thing, was that his timing was very, very peculiar, because shortly after he went back, the Civil War broke out. So one part of my consciousness partly blames him for the Civil War.
And then when did you come back?
Yes, then we suffered the Civil War. It was a family thing, because my mother is part Igbo, and we had to keep running around, and I lost a lot of relations and friends, and nearly got killed myself. Mom nearly got killed. It's a period of life that had a very, very strong impact on me, and which I proceeded to forget for 17 years because it was so horrifying, the things one saw and suffered. And then time passed, and these things you forget, and because you forget, I suppose these things sort of seem to heal. And then I studied physics and chemistry, and I wanted to be an engineer, a scientist. Mathematics was my thing at school. So time passed. I discovered Plato. I argued with my father about philosophy and about law. One day I started writing. It's one of the most unforgettable days of my life.
What makes you write?
Well, these things are very mysterious, very, very mysterious. Because we lived in a fairly big household of many relations, everybody, whatever. And the thing about African life is that it's almost like an abolishing of private space. It's so social. There's always people. There's always people. There's almost no solitude. I wanted to be an engineer. I was 14 when I finished school. I turned up for the interview. The professors took one look at me and bundled me out because I was so small. So I had 2 years on my hands in which I dabbled and read philosophy and so on, and then read poetry, and then read the Russians, and then read Ibsen. And then the next thing I knew, I picked up a pen. But the particular day I started writing stands very strong in my mind, and one of the most dividing parts of my life, apart from the Civil War, because it was the first day I remember that the house was totally empty.
Why was that?
Oh, I don't know. Everybody had gone out. Dad had gone to work. The wives had gone out. Everyone was out. And then it rained. I think someone up there thought, we better do something extraordinary.
You needed rain?
I needed rain. So it rained. It was an incredible rainfall. And I suppose everyone was trapped outside. And I was indoors. Miles Davis had been on the radio. And after Miles Davis, they played Mozart. And I remembered exactly what I did that day. It was kind of blue, and then afterwards it was followed by Eine kleine Nachtmusik. I remember that exactly. And I was in a very peculiar mood. I was sitting on this chair. My foot could hardly touch the floor, and I had a piece of paper in front of me, and I drew what was on the mantelpiece. Then after that, I turned, and then I wrote a poem. And then I waited for a bit, and I looked at the drawing. It was appalling. It was depressing. And I read the poem, and it was all right. It was all right. And from that day onwards, it became quite clear that I was going to have to be a writer. And afterwards, I wrote poems. I wrote 100 poems, destroyed 95 of them because I thought they were terrible. And then I wrote short stories. And then, not long afterwards, I wrote my first novel, which grew out of a short story. And not long after that, after finishing the novel, with this manuscript in my suitcase, with 1 or 2 pairs of trousers and one very battered pair of shoes, a typewriter, which I'd managed to get by getting myself fired from work, and a camera, which I managed to get also partly by getting myself fired, I set off like all young dreamers for London.
Dream and reality are inseparable in your fiction. Would you call that magic realism or just simply imagination?
My first novel was written very much out of the innocence of trying to write about corruption and what goodness there was in Nigeria. I grew up in an era just after the Civil War, when there was a tremendous amount of hope and corruption in society, political corruption and things like that. The first novel was therefore, like most first novels, a kind of meditation on that sort of thing while looking at the father and son relationship. It was naturalistic, because my models up till then had been Turgenev, Maupassant, to some extent Somerset Maugham, the great romantic poets, even, and just a little bit some of the African tradition, because I studied engineering, I did not study literature. I didn't read my literature till much later, you see. So the first 2 novels were very much in a naturalistic tradition. The second one was more touched by the Joycean desire to widen available reality. Now I'm quoting a very good friend's phrase there, to widen available reality. An open lens towards consciousness. I was 20 by the time of the second novel, and then something strange happened. I suppose what happened was the second novel exhausted that frame. As far as I was concerned, I had written myself to the edge of where I could write as far as naturalism went. There was 4 years of silence, during which I went to university, read, thought, did a great deal of thinking. Most of my reading led me to one very strange conclusion. I was totally dissatisfied with reality as I perceived it in most of Western fiction. While the writing was extremely good, the reality didn't speak to me because it was too narrow. And that's where that journey back to the origins I told you about started. I had to go back, all the way back. Now, in my going all the way back, I went back to not just my childhood, I went back to the childhood of my grandparents, which used to filter through to me in dreams and in little memories that I remember of my dad, the stories that my dad used to tell me about his father and about his mother, and about my mother used to tell me about her parents. And something in this investigation backwards, I had to reread, of course, the whole of African literature, the whole of the literature. In this journey back, something very strange happened. I began to realize that our reality is completely different from anybody else's. And it's not because the wooden table and chair are different, or because the sunlight is different, or because the forest breathes, or because of anything else, but because of two particular reasons that I can now isolate and state as poetically as possible. One, I realized in memory that in Africa, everything speaks. In Africa, everything gives off the essence of stories. Everything is telling a story in Africa. From lizards that run past you, to trees that are silent, to a bird that just perches there on a branch looking at you. Everything speaks. Everything is a story. Everything is a narrative. Everything is imbued with much more than it appears to be. I tried to, that struck me most when I went back to Nigeria after being away for a while. I went back home to the village, and I noticed that the streams were smaller. I noticed that the forest itself, the forest of my childhood, the stories and the melodies of those forests, I just had never noticed them because of the frame in which I'd been brought up to look at them. This Western rationalistic frame, where you look at forests and you see trees.
What did you see when you went back?
When I went back, after being re-acclimatized and after, as it were, being re-immersed through certain traditions and certain rituals, I suddenly saw that the forest was a place occupied with beings. It was a place rich with beings and stories and realms and dimensions and forces and powers and thoughts and philosophies. It wasn't just trees. I wandered through it, and it was moods. Each tree had a distinct personality and character. Birds were not just birds. Birds were also partly other things, partly other people. Sometimes people that you know, sometimes people that you remembered from your childhood. It was not innocent. It's always been there, and it's always been there in the tradition. The second thing that struck me was that because of this open lens, this open trumpet of our reality, where there's no division really between death and life. Life itself takes on at all times the aspect of death, therefore the aspect of dream. And even something beyond dream, because dream always assumes a sleeper. But I'm talking about a dream without a sleeper. So all of these things just slowly coming together in one's own frame, and my aesthetic frame anyway, has always been a spiritual one. A spiritual, poetic frame. All of these things, plus the tremendous physicality of the African universe, plus the perpetual, the storytelling, the two aspects to African reality that I've isolated in an essay I wrote called The Joys of Storytelling. One is that almost everything in Africa tells stories. When it doesn't tell stories, it's because it has, to some extent, died in the new consciousness, in this new age following colonialism. In other words, some things have actually been, their spirits have been totally conquered, and they don't speak anymore.
Full of melodies.
Everything is full of melodies.
What I was going to say is that...
So, to answer your question, whether it's magical realism or... I would not even call it African realism, because that's... I think phrases like that are limit. I've always been against notions like that, because they limit the thing itself. I prefer to have a manifestation, not have a name, so that it hits you just like that. All I'd say is that I'd just been fortunate enough to open myself up to the mysterious nature of the consciousness, the mysterious nature of life itself.
You've been talking about your Nigerian African roots in your literature. Nevertheless, it seems to belong to a universal way of living myth and epic.
Well, yes. I've always said that the spirit child concept, while we have recognized it in Africa and given it a name, and not just given it a name, but we have a lot of rituals around it. While I say that, I also say that it is not unique to Africa. I've had letters from people all over the world saying we have this phenomena too here. I've had letters from Irish folk who say we have spirit children here. I've had letters from people in Greece saying we have spirit children here. I've had letters from people in Germany saying we have spirit children here. And in my investigation of the literature, I found this to be true. Goethe's Erlkönig is to some extent a spirit child. This child's on the back of this father's horse, and he sees the spirit of death. He sees spirits. He sees beings that the father doesn't see. It's there in all the traditions. It's just that most traditions have forgotten it. They've abolished this way of seeing because of this excessive victory of science over reality. It's not a victory, it's a sort of defeat in a way, because it's a defeat of a way of seeing over what is. Also, I mean, yes, these are the roots, but like as in all trees, one is not just fed by the roots, one is also fed by the sun, by the branches and the leaves. And for me, I've also been enriched by reading, well, just about everybody, all traditions.
I wonder if the mothers of the obligate children are sad when they are gone, or are they happy because they go back to their spirit world?
Oh yes.
Or they know?
Oh no, it's devastating. No mother wants to lose their child. Or those, I mean, these days, strange things happen all over the world. But in a normal circumstance, no mother does. It's a tragic thing. This is why I say the spirit child myth is the Abiku phenomena is a tragic phenomena. It is not only depressing or frightening, it is the single greatest condemnation that the unborn have towards we who are alive and what we do with society, what we do with our possibilities, what we do with human life, what we do with the failure to love, the failure to overcome our bitternesses, our stupidities, the failure to be better than ourselves. That's the emotional bedrock for me. The fact of this tremendous condemnation that these children, they're born, they look at human reality and they say, you people have just messed it up.
Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you. You've been really wonderful.
En Londres, Silvia Lemus.